The company exited to Naspers in 2012. I stayed until 2015, and then I left and I started my another company that is doing data management for e-commerce. But now I have a new project that is focused on sustainable fashion and some fashion tech, which is really exciting for me. And ever since I left the fashion days, I was looking for a project within circular economy or shared economy, something that has a bigger impact and a bigger value, not only with just selling stuff and pushing products through, but just overall to the planet. And so I joined this new project. I'm really excited about it, and yeah, it's called Cool and Conscious. You feel free to go and check it out.
Very good. So I can go. First, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
So I spent a long time at the Neiman Marcus Group, about 16 years there. My career has been about information and technology, and kind of the fashion thing happened later in my career when I joined the Neiman Marcus Group, and saw that our technology division was not aligned with the rest of the business in terms of understanding what Neiman Marcus did for a living. So that's kind of where I began to come out from behind the scenes and start talking, around the world, with people about, how we could use technology and we could use our digital skills to do a better job of being a fashion retailer. So I founded the Innovation Lab there back in 2012, and really worked to kind of transform, how we took our information technology capabilities and applied them to the fashion business. That's what I did. I did that through 2018. I left at the end of 2018, and have since been working with some of the partners, right, that I had brought in to transform the business at Neiman Marcus. So I'm currently at a company called PowerFront, and we do live chat, messaging, AI, kind of things for digital retail, which is actually a pretty good space to be in, considering where we're at in the world today, and the new importance of the digital part of a retailer's business now, in this sort of no-touch world we find ourselves in. That's a little bit about me.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Lodovico. I am originally Swiss, but have been living in Brazil for the past 8 years. I arrived in Brazil by chance meaning through a work project in my previous life, working in a bank. And then at the end of 2012, I co-founded Amaro with 2 other friends, one Swiss and one Brazilian. And Amaro was the first DNVB's digitally native vertical brand here in Brazil. And I think by now we are the largest digital brand, direct consumer brand in Latin America. So we started when e-commerce was really at the very, very beginning here. If you just looked at the local market back then, we didn't have the big retailers were not online. We had a few marketplaces, a few discounters online, but it was super the beginning. And it was even, sorry?
What year was that? When was that?
Was 2012. And now it's still the beginning. Like Brazil's e-commerce penetration pre-coronavirus for fashion was 4%. So our business plan was much more that e-commerce would grow following the European and the American path, getting to 15-20% quickly. But it didn't, because here there are many other challenges around logistics, around fraud. People are very much afraid of buying online. They're afraid the sizes don't fit. A lot of other elements that are, I think, impeding or were impeding e-commerce to grow very quickly. But this crisis is really accelerating the shift from offline to offline as everywhere else. But here, given that the baseline was much lower, I think the impact of this will be much bigger. And so we started as an online brand in early 2013. And then in 2015, we expanded in the physical world. We opened what we call guide shops. And Scott, as an American, you probably know very well the Bonobos model of stores with inventory-less stores where customers can try on the products and we ship them home. That's what we adopted also here, so that we could have smaller footprint, very nice experience, very good stores, but at a very attractive price points. We have now 13 of those. We had plans to accelerate the physical expansion, but now these are on hold because we want to understand how physical retail will come back in the post-COVID world. What will be the role of the mall? What will be the flow? What also maybe the ideal size of the stores, right? Maybe you need smaller stores, I don't know. That's all to be seen as Brazil comes back. So we are truly omni-channel.
I'm sorry, like, isn't it Bonobos concept actually perfect for post-COVID kind of?
Exactly, yeah, because so we're actually thinking now, when we reopen the stores, what can we communicate? And this model is really touchless, right? So if you think about this new low-touch economy that we're going to see in the next months, in the next years, until we have a vaccine, I think giving the ability to customer to look at the products, but then we ship to them a fresh product, can be really a good value proposition. And before, it was an obstacle for conversions in store because people were like afraid it wouldn't get home. And now could really be, I think, a driver actually compared to the competition that have stacks of products in the stores that may not give so much confidence to customers.
Super nice. Let me just make sure that I'm recording. Yes, as well. Perfect. And how about, well, Corona is speaking in Brazil, it seems, right? I'm listening to CBN these days, and it seems that, yeah, scenario isn't very promising. But I think there's hope. At least I was out in Denmark. It's pretty good, looking good. The weather is fantastic, so people are out and about, like no one wearing masks, which, I mean, in Brazil, it seems awkward to me, but I don't know. I like to hear you guys. Also you, Scott, what's going on?
Where are you based, Scott?
I'm in Dallas. I'm in Texas.
All right.
Yeah. Look, they're trying to reopen things, around the country. Different states are at different levels.
Mm-hmm.
Here, I think, we're at, phase 2, which is a lot of things are opening at like 50% capacity, that sort of thing. I have, some doubts about, how successful that's going to be, in terms of, nothing has fundamentally changed in terms of, the disease that caused all this in the first place. Right. So the more we start congregating people together, the more I worry that we're going to, end up right back where we started, with as you had mentioned earlier, I think, a vaccine is, really the answer, to all this. And that's off, over the horizon at this point. So I'm trying to get back, to some normalcy, but, I think there are lots of people that are cautious about that. It's for instance, just because I can today go eat at a restaurant because they've allowed them to reopen doesn't mean I'm going to. In fact, I know I'm not going to. But there are a lot of people that are, as the instant those doors were open, they were back in there, right? And so more power to them, and hopefully they save the economy. But I'm on the cautious side of things, I think, and I would be wearing a mask, Carlos, and if I were out in public, even in a beautiful day, surrounded by people that weren't, that would concern me.
Really?
Well, yes, absolutely. I think that that's just look, being a technology guy, right? The mask is a primitive piece of technology, right, to help me not get that disease or to help me not give it to you, right?
Right.
So I'm a believer in applying the technology that's available.
Well, some insights from Europe. I think I am quarantined. Well, not anymore because we just got released. But I am in eastern parts of Europe, and it was a very awkward experience because in here we were under very severe quarantine, so we were not allowed to go out at all. So you could only go to the store or just have a very good reason to be on the streets. And then from one day to the next, everything got just like back to normal, which to use Scott, it also bothers me. I think it's a step too fast, and it kind of nullifies everything that we've done so far. And because our company is active in the UK, so Quant Conscious is operating on the UK market, and so we were looking to kind of maybe see to open a pop-up store over the summer, and now we are getting some feedback from retailers that already opened. In fact, I just had another call, and the notion is that all of them are sorry that they opened because nobody enters the stores. The cost of just running the store at 1/3 of capacity and 0 customers coming in is just too high. And I think we need to find some way to figure that out. Also because the rules are unclear, you cannot actually, if it's a fashion one, you cannot try items on. So it absolutely makes no sense at this point of time.
My other concern, I think too, it's what's the foot traffic going to look like? I go back to the restaurant things where they let them, a couple of weeks ago open at 25% capacity. How do you make any money running a restaurant at 25% capacity? Their margins were, razor thin, when they were at full capacity. So, I'm pretty sure that's a losing proposition. And, I can think back to Neiman Marcus where, we were always looking for how could we be better at getting more people into the store, right? More foot traffic. It was a struggle as more and more people, weren't willing to get out, right? I'm talking about pre-pandemic, right? You had to fight to get customers in the door. Now, the barrier is, sky high for that. Yeah. So are you going to generate enough foot traffic to even pay the light bill? Right, is a deep concern, I would think. Yeah.
Fortunately, often the decision to open or not may also depend, for those that are in a mall, about how the mall operator will treat rent or rent discounts. Maybe they say, I'll give you a discount if you open the store, so you're kind of forced of opening. So that's also a big topic. We have 3 stores that are opening at the end of next week in the south of Brazil, because the south of Brazil is was a bit insulated and protected from the virus. And there we kind of had to open because we will open 2 weeks later than the mall reopened. But they say if we wouldn't open, then they would start applying some fines that were in the contract because they want the malls with all the stores. But it will be a money losing proposition, and we'll have to see also how to manage the team and so to make it not lose too much money. That's a big worry, I think, of ours and everybody else.
What is the conversation that's happening with the shopping malls now? What part?
Well, I have to say, so far until the malls were closed, the mall operator have been surprisingly forthcoming to give very big rent discounts. So what happened is practically they zeroed the rent for April and May. And we only would pay half of how you call it, the shared cost, like electricity and security. So a 50% reduction on those costs while the rent was canceled. I think that was very good. What we'll have to see now is, as the mall reopen, for sure, revenues will be different for us and for everybody else until Christmas, probably, even next year, I don't know, but it will not be the same. So the rents cannot be the same as before. And I think now it's going to be much more a negotiation because maybe there are sectors that are not impacted at all. The pharmacy in the mall is making exactly as much revenue as before.
More.
or more. So they should not get a discount. However, the fashion, who is very, very discretionary, a very discretionary category, a high touch category, they will be impacted a lot. So I don't know yet how it's going to turn out. We are ready to go and negotiate with every operator, and yeah, and even potentially close some locations if you don't find a reasonable solution, because unfortunately, like, we all have to survive. But I think that the mall operator in Brazil, they understand very well that they are going to survive only if the retailers inside the mall will survive. Otherwise, there is no traffic, and they're very open to find a solution that works for everybody.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because I have other examples with shopping malls that are completely non-open to negotiations, and in fact, they've already started invoicing, even for the month of March, where you have, the half of the month was maybe operational, and they'll do full invoice, and then it was not even a zero rent in Romania, especially. It was not in Bucharest. The Bucharest shopping malls, they were. It's not zero rent. It's just that you're not expected to pay it while the quarantine lasts, but the minute it is over, you get a full invoice for the months that have passed.
Very short-sighted.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm really curious to see with the retail, like the brick and mortar struggling before COVID. I'm just curious to see how things will work out now after this.
Yeah, everybody will have to adjust their expectation, because the mall operator cannot have the same return on his investment as before. Expect everybody to pay and just have half the people in the stores. That's not going to work. Retailers will close, and if retailers close, you're going to start having a negative spiral, because people will not go to the mall, and then it's going to be even worse.
But
You
look,
know, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that I'm really interested, because I think of all of us, I think Ludovico is the one who is producing something like a physical product. But what happened? Were you ready with your? Did you had something produced before this situation hit? And which season was it?
So we are in the winter now
in
Brazil. It's actually quite cold. I'm wearing a sweater and all of that. People don't think Brazil can be cold. So we were getting into fall, right? So March is like your September, October in the Northern Hemisphere. We were receiving, and we are receiving, jackets and sweaters. We have an own factory that produces about 25% of our goods, and the rest is produced in Brazil and partly imported. Luckily, we have a very short lead time. We have about 8 weeks lead time, so we could cancel a lot of purchase orders.
Okay. Super.
And we do 70% of revenue online, so we are not overstocked, or not too much overstocked. While I know that the physical retailers here in Brazil, they have 80% excess inventory, and that's why we're seeing in the market just a very, very promotional environment throughout, because they have to get rid of what they have in the stores to make space for then the future seasons. What we've been hearing also is that many will just take the winter jackets that are unsold and put them in boxes and use them next season, instead of discounting them now at 50%. I think given that we have a short lead time, we could react quite well to the change in demand.
Yeah, but this is also because you have control over the supply chain.
Partly, yeah.
Because what happens with us, and Quant Conscious is a marketplace that holds a lot of brands, right? Like a lot of producers. And what happened really extremely quickly was that all the producers, all the brands started canceling orders with the producers. The producers, because the fashion industry is just so fragmented and untransparent, so everybody started canceling back. And so many factories, especially in Turkey or Asia, were heavily affected. Like a very big part of them are out of business or barely surviving. And there was this discussion that is really picking up now, and we will try to be part of it and support it technologically. Is what there needs to be some sort of responsibility on all parties throughout the supply chain, because you would have some of the big producers, let's say Inditex or H&M, who's completely stopped picking up their phones, and these are factories that they are working with for, I don't know, 20 years. And so you cannot expect to push all down, like 100% of the heavyweight, push it to your partner and expect them to survive and come back with the same willingness to work.
We should bring, that should be a discussion point during this thing for sure. There's a lot to talk about there, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we are a very small fish, but we know from our suppliers that the big retailers, they just stopped paying. They sent an email and they say, hi, the next payment will be only starting in July. That's it, no discussion about it.
Wow.
And they don't care because they're so big, right? So they don't care if they receive a notification or a letter or so. While we try to do a plan with all of our suppliers where, like, the more they're dependent on us, the more we created a payment plan that could support them, like halfway, right? We never left anything unpaid, but we discussed the terms. But looking at the dependency they have on us, because you also don't want to be the one creating a series of bankruptcies along the supply chain.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the industry will never come back.
Be right back.
All right.
Yeah, exactly. So what several companies are trying to do now is kind of, there is a lot of notion around the use of blockchain in fashion tech, which wasn't very welcomed, I think, just because people had other things to do. Like, it was not, it was never a priority. But I think now that this thing happened, all the little links in the supply chain, they want to be visible simply because they want to have responsibility all the way through the supply chain. And you can only have that if you are on the map, right? If somebody knows that you exist. And so I think now people and companies are opening much more to accepting some sort of technology that will put them on the map of any product's production, and just make it. And from this point, I think this COVID thing will have an immense positive impact on the industry as a whole. I think this conversation is just gonna have to change, because even Nike's, and as you said, they simply sent an email out and that was it. And these are companies who can survive months of lockdown.
Super interesting insights already. Cool.
Yeah, I'm curious. Unfortunately, Scott went away, but I was just curious his take on technology. He's back.
Hey, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. Hey, I was just wondering what's your take on blockchain implementation in fashion, or other type of technology that would just make the supply chain more transparent.
Yeah, look, in my role at PowerFront, I haven't had a lot of opportunity to think about blockchain, but before I joined them, that was kind of top of mind. Mm-hmm. And I was working with a consultancy that sustainability was one of their kind of pillars, of the business. This organization called Current Global, so look, we thought blockchain was critical for transparency in the supply chain, especially when you started to think about this push towards sustainability, and you needed that traceability, back, along the line. Blockchain solves that problem, right? Yes. So we thought it was a hot topic, and and spent a lot of time discussing it, with our, kind of the retailers we were consulting with. I don't, in my position now, like I said, I don't get to see it on a, or talk about it on a daily basis, but I would think that I'd be concerned that maybe sustainability is taking a little bit of a back burner, and everybody's thinking more about surviving right now. Sustainability is convenient. If it's convenient, they're doing it, and if it's not, maybe they're not putting an emphasis on it. You're probably closer to that than me.
Yeah. No, you definitely right. But on the other hand, I think there are a couple of different layers of this conversation. So definitely the bigger companies who are actually the only ones who can bring some sort of sustainability at scale, because you need the scale to make it affordable and commercial. They're definitely gonna put it to the back now, simply because they definitely need to catch up for the last I don't know, 6 months where they're at zero. But that aside, I think there is a change, and we discussed this while you were gone. I think there's a change in the supply chain understanding of their importance and how they want to be part of of this chain. And I think because of what happened, and because they were so burned by the situation and by their partners, by the big retailers, they are now much more than ever convinced and willing to go blockchain and be transparent and be on the map, simply because then you cannot pretend that they don't exist and that you don't know that they're there. And so I think from that angle, there will be a push for some sort of implementation of some sort of technology just to make the supply chain more transparent. And the other one is, I think there is a slight change in people's perception of what they actually need, because they may have come to the realization that they don't need as much after being locked down at home for as many months as they have been. I mean,
right?
Excuse me, guys. Can I officially kick off the event, and then we continue with the discussions, because people are joining in just to be.
Not the official.
Sure.
I thought we were done.
Do we have a check?
We go live. We're going live now. So it's 3:30 CET as I promised. Actually 3:33. So slightly Brazilian delay here. Not so much, right, Ludovico? But hello everyone.
Brazilian. What's the threshold? What's the Brazilian delay?
No, we are always on time here. I'm Swiss.
Ludovico is Swiss, so.
Okay.
So hey everyone, thanks very much for joining in. Thank you very much to all these brilliant speakers here. We have a brilliant bunch of people joining these Evolve Talks. Firstly, I'd like to start off by saying thank you to Divante, who's a very large software house in Poland. Tom Karvaczka and his team, they made it all possible as well. And to Sander, who convinced Ludovico to join this talk, Sander from Adyen. And yeah, basically we are joined today by leading experts, very respected professionals in the retail and fashion arena. They pretty much they made their careers in fashion. Ludovico, you will introduce yourself because you said it was odds to appear in Brazil. But today we're going to be discussing the future of fashion in a post-COVID society. And I want to really pick your brains on the impact that COVID had in your businesses, how consumer behavior is being transformed and shaped. What are the trends in technology, society? Eva, you probably have a lot of interesting takes as well there. How supply chain is going to be transformed, less dependency from China. Please, I have a pledge for that to happen. I think that has to happen. Government should intervene. That's my opinion as well. And yeah, the future of fashion commerce in general. So basically, I always start my interviews with the same good old questions, the big picture. I would ask you guys to introduce yourselves and we jump into the conversation. Who's first?
I can go. So I'm Scott Emmons. I am sitting in my home in Dallas, Texas, is where I'm broadcasting from today. I spent a long time at the Neiman Marcus Group, which is, how I think, I earned an invitation to, come and hang out with you guys today, was that role. I was there for 16 years. I started out there as an IT guy and evolved into a fashion and technology guy. over those years, including I founded their innovation lab in 2012 and started, a campaign to bring technology to bear to help our fashion experts and our team of of luxury retailers do an even better job of that, and to resonate with both brick and mortar customers and digital customers at the Neiman Marcus Group. I left there at the end of 2018. And today I am working with a company called PowerFront, which is about digital customer engagement and about bringing a face-to-face physical kind of retail experience to digital shopping. That's kind of what we do. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lodovico. I am originally from Switzerland, from the Italian part of Switzerland, where I grew up, and then I started a very traditional career for Switzerland in banking before I moved to Brazil at the end of 2012 to start this new adventure, and where I co-founded Amaro with two other friends. Amaro was Brazil's first DNVB, digitally native vertical brand. And now we are most likely the largest digital brand in Latin America. So we are on one hand lucky in this crisis because most of our revenue comes from e-commerce, and we're seeing really the boom of e-commerce finally happening here in Brazil, in Brazilian fashion. On the other hand, we are as impacted as many others because we are an omni-channel brand. We do run 13 physical stores. We call them guide shops, where customers can go see the products, try the products, and then we would ship the products at home. And they have been closed for the past 2 months, without any perspective to opening it. And yes, and I think as a digital brand, we in a very, very traditional market that is Brazil, in a very traditional industry, we're trying here to innovate a lot, to push the boundaries of how the customer experience is, both in terms of products, but also in terms of digital customer experience, customer service, very fast logistics, etc. That are all elements to support, I think, more e-commerce penetration, many happy customers, and a lot of returning customers here in Brazil. I hope I can bring some maybe perspective from emerging markets that's a little bit different than what's happening in the US and Europe. And also now we are at the really epicenter of the coronavirus. So it's impacting us quite a lot. And it would be interesting then to discuss with the others also how they're seeing the recovery happening elsewhere.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eva. I've been involved in building digital products for the last 15 years. I was part of the founding team of Fashion Days, which is a big fashion marketplace in Central and Eastern Europe. It was sold to Naspers in 2012, and I stayed with the company until 2015. And in the meantime, I started another company. But then in 2019, I was looking to join a project with doing something with sustainability or circular economy. And this is how I co-founded the current company called Co & Conscious. It's a sustainable fashion marketplace operating in the UK and now looking to expand to the US. And so it's very interesting timing for us because we launched our company in the beginning of 2020, focusing around sustainability and educating customers on what conscious fashion was. And we, just before the kickoff of this event, we were discussing with Scott if people would care, or if companies would care about sustainability. So I'm really curious to discuss with all of you your take on that and what the customer demand will look like in these coming months.
Fantastic. I think in order to start the conversation, I was today listening to a podcast, the business of fashion, and it was an episode with their founder and also McKinsey. And it was interesting to hear that they had it was 2020 was one of the worst years according what CEOs were predicting in terms of forecasts. And I mean, we had a lot of already trade wars going on between the US and China, a lot of strange things in the air. So we had a very strange environment pre-COVID already taking place, and now we have COVID. I think where I would like to start this conversation is by the reality. So unemployment, right? Unemployment has I mean, at least in the US, what we hear, 22 million, according to what I read last from Washington Post. In Brazil, I think I was talking to my dad today, another 4 million officially unemployed. So all in all, you have 16 million unemployed. We can talk a lot about cool stuff and technology, but if there's not enough people earning money, so there's no consumption. So I like to start this conversation by the unemployment subject, and how is it, how is it affecting your business? What's going on in each one of the regions?
Well, maybe taking you mentioned Brazil, taking the emerging markets perspective. We are coming out in Brazil already from a very deep recession around 2015, 16, 17, and a very, very weak economic recovery. People were very optimistic at the beginning of the year. So we could see the retailers posting 7, 8, 9, 10% same-store sales until February, early March, which was good. And then the crisis hit with an already high unemployment rate. And then you can discuss, because in Brazil there's already there is a lot of informality, so it's actually even higher, the real unemployment rate. So of course this will impact a lot. I think this will impact especially those brands that have medium to high price points, where people will naturally trade down from those. We are more in a mass market segment, maybe like upper mass market, but still mass, and may take advantage. But for sure, like affordable luxury and luxury will be heavily impacted, because like salaries will come down and a lot here in the country. Also, contrary to Europe, where governments have been supporting companies through loans, right, credits, and Kurzarbeit in Germany, these good schemes that allowed to maintain employment. In our country, and I think in the US as well, the system is a little bit different, and companies had to let go people after the stores were closed for a long time, because there's no way to support them. The government didn't really put money into the system. And yes, of course, we are very much afraid, because ours is a discretionary category, and being discretionary, if the economy doesn't work well, people will consume less and will consume differently. Maybe they will not buy very disposable items, and this goes back to the sustainability topic that we were talking before with Eva. They may buy longer-term items, right? Products that are not meant for one occasion, but products that may be a little bit more expensive, but maybe can be used in multiple occasions or for a longer time. So the consumption pattern will change a lot as we come out of the crisis.
Yeah,
I think that the jury's still out here, in terms of, I'm thinking back to January, which seems like 20 years ago now, in terms of the differences that have occurred in just a few months, where, I was at NRF, the big National Retail Federation show in New York, and everything was, pretty normal, right? It was a packed show, and everybody was optimistic, and business was going pretty good. And, it was, optimistic even, I would say. And, it just took a few weeks, right, to completely turn that on its head. As we're talking about fashion and luxury, which is, the part of the retail business I've been involved in, you're right, it is discretionary. And not only, if we're all in quarantine, you have to ask, what is the purpose of fashion and luxury? How much of a need is there? I mean, I suppose there's the purists that love it and are going to try to obtain it no matter what, right? But that's not a big enough percentage probably to sustain, the business, to be honest. And then, these other factors that jumped in, along with the virus, like, this whole global trade uncertainty and, the US and China's, constant, going at each other, it feels like. And the, look, here in Texas directly, right, the energy prices and, what's happened, with oil and gas, here over the last few months, that those businesses, sustained a lot of people and drove a lot of revenue, and sent a lot of, paid a lot of luxury shopping bills, right? And that money's not coming in for those people anymore, right? So they're gonna, be sitting on, on the sidelines as well. So, there's a lot of factors. I think it would be safe to predict that demand will be a lot less for the foreseeable future. But, there's a lot we don't know. There's, it's still evolving right in front of our eyes. So
yeah, I agree. It's hard to have a sentence what's going to happen. For us, for example, we sensed it almost immediately. So almost immediately after lockdown, the sales went dramatically down. However, some of the verticals in fashion have killed it, like all the sweatshirts and loungewear and, the things that you need to be comfortable at home. Those guys are hitting great numbers at the moment still. So somebody's going to benefit. I mean, fashion is fashion, like it depends on the occasion. But going back to what Ludovico said, I was just thinking, because sometimes we go and we buy, especially as, women, we go and buy occasional wear where you just use it once. And so I think this may actually have a very positive impact on the rental industry, because especially in the UK, there's a couple of companies now obviously struggling because there's not a lot of occasions at the moment. But I think just going forward, people will want to be spending less and less on one-time off items, and they would want to rather go rent them from their peers. There's a company called Her. They're doing peer-to-peer rental, and there's another company, I can't recall their name, where they would just buy a lot of luxury goods, similar to Rent the Runway in the US, and you can just rent it for a wedding and then give it back. So I'm really curious how it's going to affect all those models. But that said, definitely the unemployment is expected to spike even in Europe, even with all the support from the states. I think the UK now expanded their furlough scheme, which is, the scheme where employees stay at home and the state covers a big portion of their salary. They extended it for another 4 months, which is, kind of great for the economy and for people, because they are at least calmer that they have another 4 months runway with some income, which is great. But I read, especially for the DACH region, that the unemployment rate, which there was never high, that they're expecting to hit some really, really high numbers, like in the like 20% type of, where it's always an insignificant amount normally.
Well, the other thing to consider here too on the U.S., right, is that there has been some government help. The PPP loan program, for instance, there is a significant kind of monthly increase in unemployment benefits, that are underwritten by the federal government. And, the PPP stuff is, companies would be starting to come to the end of that very soon. It was just an 8-week window. And I believe the government subsidies on unemployment end in July, so just a little over a month away. And then you're really going to start to, I think, see what the impact of having such a large number of unemployed folks are going to be on the economy, right? Which how can you think it's going to be anything other than a huge drag, right, on it? And you look at what the stock market's doing and compare it to what you see is happening out there in the job market and the business, and you just wonder what's the disconnect here. It's just everything is askew right now.
Mic drop.
Yeah.
Poof. Nice. And so in Denmark, we have about 568 deaths, 11 cases still going on, but only 2% of these cases are critical. And I think we were talking before about how the consumer behavior is going to be transformed. I think you and Eva, Ludovico, touching on the point that people might be a little bit more reticent to go into shops and so on. What's your take on that? And just to my point, I mean, as I said at the beginning of the call, people are in Denmark, at least they seem very laid back. I don't know, but that's the Danish way as well. No one wearing masks, and Denmark or Scandinavia, but you can't really compare Denmark and Sweden because they've taken completely different measures, and things seem to have worked in Denmark. However, people are quite relaxed, I would say, outside. Sunny day, people going out having beers, and it's fantastic. So, yeah.
I think the behavior of people will be
It's
quite highly correlated by how the country was impacted. So if I speak with my friends in Italy, they still see the scars, right, that this happened. So they're behaving much more carefully. We in Brazil, we are now at the epicenter of the coronavirus. We are probably, the cases you reported are way less than it is, because there is huge under notification problem and lack of testing, even more than the States, right? Given we are in an emerging markets, and only grave cases are tested. So we think that the consumer behavior in retail will be will come back very slowly. We'll see a shift to online, a massive shift to online. E-commerce was very low here in Brazil, and we're gonna come out of this with probably 2-3 times higher e-commerce penetration, and that's gonna stick. Like, people will not go back to their offices, right? So you can see that happening. Tech companies especially are now being much more open to a remote or a mixed way of working, partly remote, partly at home. This will also impact the way where you spend your time, how you go to the malls, and where you spend your money. So here we see still a very slow recovery. I have no data points because nothing is open yet in the physical space. I only have online data points, and they're good, luckily. And I'm actually very curious to hear how countries that already slightly recovered, like Europe especially, how they are coming back in terms of retail.
Yeah, well, as we spoke earlier, I think the markets are starting to slowly, open, and brick and mortar starts to slowly open. But the unclear regulation and just this uncertainty with people, I think the shops that are already open, at least this is the feedback that we're getting, the shops that are already open, they work under such a low capacity that they wish they weren't open, because the cost of running the shops at the moment is so high. The foot traffic is very little, and people are just not entering shops and not buying at all. And still you cannot, certain costs you cannot cut. So they would rather they'd rather stay closed. And this we see that also not only with the brick and mortar shows, but also with other businesses. And just the simplest example is our PR agency in London, who is on furlough for the past 3 months. And our initial negotiation with them was like, we said, look, we are experiencing a decrease in sales because we are in this affordable luxury segment, and just a brand new brand launching on a huge market. And so we've asked for just negotiating a different fee. And what they said is that they'd prefer to not service us at all. So we just put pause on our contract for the coming months, because it would be more expensive for them to actually, even more expensive to service us than before. So they've canceled completely. But that said, I think people are looking into different models and starting to figure out ways. And I think what you guys are doing with the Bonobo concept, I think now it kind of seems perfect, because you would have this very curated space where only a limited amount of people will go in at a schedule, maybe, I don't know, and then you can actually take care of the environment and address people's fears. On the other hand, as I said, here in Sofia, where I am, when the lockdown was released, things went back to normal incredibly fast. So it's still not released in the UK as it is here. And I don't know how people will react in the UK, but here everything is just crazily back to normal. Like, people are in the restaurants and they're in the shops, and it's like as if they never lived. So
Good.
yeah.
I think
Hopefully it's good.
we're seeing the same thing here. I think as things open up, you do see lots of sort of reports on the news, and as you get out and about to do your grocery shopping or whatever it is you have to do, there's a lot of people out moving around and doing stuff, and a lot of pent-up demand. But I think that the concern, and we discussed this earlier, right before the broadcast started, right, is that nothing's really necessarily fundamentally changed about why we went into lockdown in the first place, right? So the deep concern, and the media is happy to echo this constantly, is that we're just going to end up right back where we were, with this sudden rush to return to normalcy. While Carlos, it's wonderful that on a beautiful sunny day everybody's running around in Denmark with no mask, what's the long-term results of that, right? The fact is, we are in a new normal. Are folks going to adapt to the new normal? Or are we going to put ourselves back into trouble to try to rush back to the old normal?
Actually, there is a lot of talk now in the sustainable fashion kind of segment, where people claim that it's a great opportunity. Well, it is a great opportunity for people to rethink their purchasing habits and just go to a more conscious way of living generally. But I think that's a little bit of an illusion we'd like to kind of throw out there in the space. I think it takes much more than that to change consumer behavior. And even if the games of the rules of brick and mortar game change, that's not going to change the need of people to buy. Maybe they're not going to buy what they used to buy before, but they're still going to go out there and buy much more than they actually need. So, which is the actual issue that we need to address, looking at a grander scheme of things. And so I think, it's, I don't want to be, a downer here, but I think it's just an illusion, and people will definitely, in the minute that they can, they will go back to what they were doing before. And you can see that in China, because China opened in, I don't know, a month ago, and Louis Vuitton did in one shop 2 million USD in turnover in like 24 hours. So
did that sustain though? I mean, I saw that information as well. I'd like to see what that curve looked like after the first, kind of week, for a few days, first week.
Sure. I mean, yeah, of course. But
obviously there is some pent up demand,
Right.
and when you
2 months at home, you go out and spend everything at once.
Yeah, well, I can understand it. Like, buying a bag is an important thing. So.
Well, and the other thing is, how much was being driven by retailers trying to, to dump their excess inventory, right? And offering really attractive prices to do that.
Yeah.
So guys, what are the big trends that you're seeing now for retailers in terms of technology, society? Eva, I'd like maybe to provoke you a little bit, because when we talk about sustainable fashion, like a business has to grow, right? And if you have to grow, you have to sell more. And if you
Yeah.
have to sell more, how can you be sustainable? You know. So I like also to listen from you guys. What are the big trends that you're seeing, and maybe provoke you a little bit, Eva? Like you know,
Actually, it's you may think it's a provocative question, but it actually isn't. I think I have a different take on this. I think it's not about driving a wedge between sustainable fashion and fashion generally. I think we are at a point of time where, let's say, print was maybe 20 years ago when online newscasters started popping up, right? It's we need to transition the fashion industry into a much more transparent and sustainable industry, simply because it is producing in a way that is ineffective and unsustainable and ultimately harming the environment. The way to do that is something very complex, right? It's a task that we are not going to solve now in 15 minutes of conversation. But one of the ways is that we need to, well, there's several ways and technologies that are already starting to appear. One is to make the supply chain more transparent. And what we were talking just before we started, we were having this private conversation, is that right now with COVID, we had an interesting phenomenon where the big retailers just pulled the plug on their supply chain. And because the supply chain is so fragmented and untransparent, so many companies on the chain could not even claim that they were owned something, right? There was, as Ludovico said, there was an email sent out that the next payment will be in June. And then from March to June, you had 0 orders and 0 payments, and you had a lot of brinks on the supply chain behind you who are waiting for payments to be paid. And so this needs to change. And I think it's really a great opportunity for companies now. And when, like a couple of months ago, if you go to a producer or a factory or a fabrics manufacturer and talk to them about the blockchain, they'll just laugh at you. It's not on the agenda. It's not part of their business. But now they realize why it is important that this blockchain technology becomes part of their business, because that's going to put them on the map. It's going to put them there as part of the supply chain. And you can no longer pretend that they don't exist, because they are provenly on the supply chain. So that's one way to go about it. And the other one, like generally, I think it is important to start thinking about circularity in materials and circularity in the way we design. For example, I don't want to bore you with facts, but just a brief, a handful of them. So for example, it's very difficult. There is almost 0 recycling in fashion. The reason for that is that it's very expensive to recycle, and the result of what you get after the recycling is very cheap. So there is no business case in that. So when we think about recycling in fashion, we may, imagine that something is recycled, or you bought something made of plastic bottles, great. But recycling in fashion makes zero business sense. For example, if you buy a leather jacket and the leather jacket has zippers on it, there is no way for this to be recycled, because it's so expensive to remove the zipper from the leather, like take them apart. So nobody bothers, right? And even if leather is a biodegradable natural product, nobody's going to remove the zipper, and there is a lot of effects from that. So one way is to address the way we design, and the other one is to address the materials that we use. The most recyclable material is polyester, which is heavily found in items that we wear. The problem with that is that in the minute that you wash it, it emits microplastics, and they go into the sea. There is so many researches coming out now that these microplastics are found now in deep sea creatures, in about 50% of the deep sea creatures. This is something that you cannot see, and you cannot filter, and you cannot remove from water. So that's a big problem. Like, ultimately, I think at the moment, a person eats 1 credit card per week, I guess. So just with your food intake, with everything that's in our nature. So going back to your question, I think it's not of sustainable fashion and the other type of fashion. It's just all the fashion players moving to more sustainable practices in production and ultimately having circularity in mind, simply because we love to buy things, be fashion products or whatever, phones or anything that we don't need, and there is a comfort in buying, and there's people enjoy something like that. And so I think the idea is not to punish people because they enjoy to do something. The idea is to produce something that is not going to ask people to change their habits and their behaviors, but it's going to be something that you can put on the ground, and then it's going to biodegrade, or you can take back into pieces and use all of its different pieces to do something else. And the concept of circular economy has been out there for over 20 years, I guess. And now it's a little bit more out there and people are paying attention a little bit more to it. It's going to take a while, but I think customer behavior also changes. And I think after the COVID, is something that we discussed. After the COVID, when people realize that they don't necessarily need as many things, maybe that's going to be a different push. If you look at the H&M financial report for 2018, you will notice that they have actually been heavily hit by change in demand and customer perception, and they have started to redo their business in a way. So they are testing different types of shop environment, so much more curated spaces and experience spaces. They've started, they are going into the secondhand market with some of their brands because they figured out that, for example, and other stores is doing great on the secondhand market. So they're tapping into that. And they're launching different concepts because people are now saying to one of the fast fashion giants that they're not anymore interested in fast fashion, because 20% drop in sales is a massive thing for a company this size.
So, I mean, just to jump in first quickly, I think that, all the things you just talked about in terms of, the reasons why sustainability are important and desirable, none of that's changed, right? They're all still good reasons to do it. I suspect that there is probably a tendency to put some of those efforts on hold in terms of, thinking more about survivability and not sustainability right now. And, how am I going to continue going forward as a business? And if sustainability is not a key part of, what's going to keep me in business, then I'm probably, not thinking about that right now.
Sure.
That's what I suspect is happening, and in my current role, I don't get to talk about it as much as I did in some of the previous things I did, where we did spend a lot of time talking about sustainability when I was at Current Global, for instance, and we're working with retailers and brands and how they could improve the traceability and transparency of the supply chain. Now, in my current role, I just don't get to do it as much. I did note in our Q&A that someone had asked earlier, could you name any companies already utilizing blockchain technology for their supply chain? And, I'd throw that one your way, Eva, since you seem to be closer to it.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last thing.
Someone had asked early, and it's on our Q&A board here for this Zoom meeting. If you had any good examples of companies utilizing blockchain technology, in their supply chain today.
Sure. Well, there are a couple of companies. Provenance is one who are introducing this technology, and whoever is interested can go to their website and just see who is on using their technology. And there is another one. They're not utilizing blockchain, but a different type of technology. It's called Eon. EON. Also a great company shedding some light into the supply chain. And then there's two other models. There is a company called Supply Compass, and what they're doing is they're helping companies build supply chain from scratch that is fully transparent. So they would find the design facility, and then the production facility, and then the sourcing of materials, and they will link them together for any given company or customer. But there is another, so most of the companies who have transparent supply chains are direct to consumer, I assume, as Amaro, right? Direct to consumer companies who have hold of their supply chain. For example, there is a company called Down Jeans. They have their own factory in Vietnam, and so they are very transparent about their supply chain. But the reason they can be is simply because they know exactly where they produce, and that's easy when you are a direct to consumer brand and you have maybe a very little variety in type of products. It gets a little bit more, it gets a little bit harder when you are Nike or H&M at your massive scale, where you have, you know, maybe the first tier of your suppliers and maybe the second, but then you just don't know. And it's not because you don't want to know, it's just because some of the factories would never tell you who they're working with, and with all the efforts out there, these are massive structures, and so it's going to take a while for those to be, and it needs to come from the lower brings up, not from the top down, because the top down effort has been performed for many years now, for over a decade, and with a very mixed results.
If I may add a few things around sustainability, a lot of times it seems that these projects are very complex and expensive to implement for companies if we go about reviewing the supply chain, different materials, recycling. However, there are a few things that I think brands can do at quite low cost that also have an impact by using technology. One example that we just recently did last year is we moved all our pattern making operations to 3D pattern making. So we used to develop 3 physical prototypes per product that we would produce. You try it on the model and then you change and you produce another one. Now we reduce that to 1 physical prototype. So we save 2 physical prototypes per products because we do this on a 3D model. This allows much better collaboration with suppliers, allows a lot of savings in terms of wasted fabrics and just transporting of patterns, right, of prototypes back and forth. So that's, I think, an easy example of how, of course, the impact is small, but if everybody would stop doing a lot of prototypes, can also have an impact. Another one is digital showrooms for wholesalers. A lot of brands still work with this very traditional approach of doing a wholesale showroom and then produce a ton of prototypes. Buyers go there and look at them. I think there's a lot of money and fabrics to be saved by just moving showrooms online, make them more agile, quicker, and also more sustainable, so that buyers select products there and then the products are produced only afterwards. So I think there are lots of ways of merging technology and innovation and sustainability to be both cheaper and sustainable at the same time.
Yeah,
sorry.
Just a quick one, because I've been watching like a lot of lives. There's a company in Brazil doing a brilliant work there called XP. They're doing some brilliant stuff, and they were talking about the like for fashion brands in Brazil, everything used to be imported, and so they are predicting that this is going probably to be the year or next year for fashion, for Brazilians consuming fashion in Brazil, because the air traffic is just going to be lower. Like you're not going to travel so much to China, or and then on top of that, I'd like to also ask you guys about the future of fast fashion. So how are you seeing consumers now behave in terms of local brands consuming stuff from their own country opposed to how things used to be, and fast fashion? These are two very maybe different questions, but
so let me take the first. Brazil is a famously high tax country. It's one of the worst countries in the world in terms of import taxes and tax complexity. This means that at higher levels of society, luxury brands, it's cheaper to buy them in Europe, in Miami, than in Brazil. this people will travel less, will consume more here, but this is only impacting, I think, like the upper levels of society. The mass market has been local and will continue to be local. But I think there may be a trend of local consumption in general, in terms of consumer becoming more conscious. This will drive more local consumption of local brands and also more local supply chains.
Mm-hmm.
On fast fashion, I think I disagree a little bit. Often people say fast fashion is dead. I think it depends on what's the definition of fast fashion. If the definition of fast fashion is cheap disposable products, yes, that may not be the case. But if the definition of fast fashion is a very agile supply chain that is able to quickly react to changes in demand, both in terms of volume and styles, it's here to stay, is actually going to increase. For our next season, we're going to reduce our lead times further down to 6 weeks because we don't know. We don't know consumer demand. We don't know what consumer will be looking for in terms of styles. If people will stay more at home, if people will travel, we go to the beach, we don't know. So the shorter we can do our supply chain, the better we can react, and we can prevent to have a lot of waste, running around the market and having to sell at discounts. This doesn't mean, though, that you have to do cheap disposable products. So we are a fast fashion brand in terms of operations, and we want to be even faster because I think that's the way to be sustainable also, because you don't have waste and you react quickly.
I completely agree. Actually, I think we need to distinguish between what we call fast fashion. And when we say fast fashion, we actually mean cheap disposable products that come in heaps. But there is a huge benefit in fast fashion in terms of fast in operation and fast dispatch, because it allows you to do small batches of things, reduce waste, and waste is a huge issue in fashion. It's one of the bigger problems, that it just generates a lot of trash, of unused items. And so I think we need to find a new term to define this fast fashion in sense of fast and agile operations. I was talking to the sustainability head of ASOS, and those guys are, also approaching the change in their model from exactly that angle, because they want to have the variety that people are used to, but in much smaller budgets. So they don't produce heaps of products. It's not a huge production line. It's just something that you produce in small batches. It goes fast to market, and then you go to the next one, which is a different approach. It's not necessarily a cheap product. It's not necessarily a disposable product. And it actually allows and helps to address a lot of the issues in fashion. And also, in order for you to have a transparent and that much of an agile production, it needs to be transparent, and you need to be in control of it. Otherwise, it's not going to happen, right? So it has a lot of positives, and I think combining that with new materials and new ways of designing items is actually the way forward, and one of the ways that fashion needs to develop into.
Perfect. Yeah, I like to ask you also about the store of the future then. And Scott, I think you have maybe some ideas there as well, especially with the masks and how consumers are becoming more cautious. Maybe that's the word.
Well, there's a lot. There's definitely a lot of room for innovation there, isn't there? And that's going to require some experimentation. I mean, I think that retailers are probably going to have to try, some approaches, and some aren't going to work, and some are, going to resonate. We don't know what that landscape fully looks like yet. And then you've got sort of like here in the U.S. this sort of weirdness right now of things like masks being some sort of political expression as well. And if you're on the conservative side, you're against them, and if you're on the liberal side, then you're for them, and which I find astounding. Because to me, masks are just our technology, just like anything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a piece of technology to apply, to a problem. In this case, the spread of this virus. What are we going to have to think about? I came from a big department store world. Is that a sustainable, model, going forward? It's, TBD, right? My former employer filed for bankruptcy. Neiman Marcus has filed for bankruptcy. I don't think that's necessarily, 100% because of COVID. I think that just sped it along, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, they were actually operating under an unsustainable debt, and that needed to be fixed. That the leveraged buyouts that happened, years back, the financials that were used to legitimize that didn't turn out right. Didn't come to play, and they weren't going to be able to make those interest payments over time. So, I see, that Neiman Marcus at the high end, but then I see, mid-tier, retailers also struggling. JCPenney's has filed for bankruptcy, for example. Pier 1 here, which is a, kind of consumer goods, chain, filed for bankruptcy. They were, these were all struggling before COVID, and now, COVID just sort of, signed their.
We should be careful not to use COVID as an excuse for business models that
weren't
worked in
working
the past
anyway,
and were
right?
not current anymore.
Yeah, look, the fact that we were sort of over retailed, and you had retailers that were that didn't necessarily solve a problem for their customers, if you will. COVID was just the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, right? In those cases. And so, another one, here, Dallas has been kind of known, for having a lot of retail headquarters. And, I've seen, just in the last couple of weeks, right, 4 of those file bankruptcy. So it's, if the problem, that, the media loved to state that we had too much retail and too much square foot for retail, that problem seems to be kind of solving itself. At this point, and maybe one of the things we walk out of, on the other end of this is physical retail, more right-sized.
I think there will be also much more direct to consumer in general. So wholesalers, so multi-brand boutiques, department stores will be much less relevant in the future retail landscape.
Well,
Right.
I would go back to that supply chain discussion for a moment, and say that, when the H&Ms and the other, big retailers of the world just stopped answering their phones, to their supply chain because they were, their stores were closed and they weren't going to, place any orders or do any business. They broke a lot of those relationships, I think, in that process. And those guys, just once again, where it's about survival, are certainly going to go, around these guys and go direct to the consumer. They all, have families to feed as well, right? You don't just turn that off at the other end of this. Once those relationships are established, that probably, has a continuing impact, right, on the business, even when the pandemic is not a part of the equation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very nice. Very nice.
Ludovico, I'm just sorry. Can I ask a question?
Please.
I was wondering, how are you guys doing with? What is the delivery look like the delivery process, especially the last mile, and has that changed now under the COVID circumstances?
So Brazil is a huge country. In proportions, Brazil goes from Portugal to Russia, if you would overlay it in Europe. So it is a huge country with a lot of complexity. Since we started our business, we fought a lot to deliver very fast in the main cities, especially Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, because our competitor is not another online store, but is rather the street side store in the customer city. So we have to be very fast to be convenient. We deliver in Sao Paulo same day to practically potentially 10 million people can receive same day. and in other cities next day. We managed to maintain this. We are seeing a lot of issues further away from Sao Paulo. So in the northeast of Brazil, it's taking longer to deliver because there are much less flights going there. So we used a lot of belly cargo of planes, and then there are no planes. So it's taking longer to get to places where air transport was being used. Wherever we use street transport, so cars and motorboys, we managed to maintain the quick delivery times. And we noticed that the customers, since customers are at home now the whole time, they're also very impatient. And they're very sensible to hitting the promised delivery time. So you have to manage very actively expectations even more than before.
Sure. And you are doing it yourself, or you have a logistics partner? So
we have our own distribution center. We manage our fulfillment center. We believe that in a market like this, it's very important to have a lot of control on the operations. Then we do the last mile delivery with 7 different partners.
Okay. Yeah. What's the payment type in Brazil? What customers pay by
card? It's about 70% credit cards, and 30% a thing called boleto, which is like a payment slip. It's like an invoice at the end. You have to pay that in your online banking, and then when we receive payment confirmation, we send you the invoice.
Okay.
The first time I went to Romania, it's have you ever heard of COD, cash on delivery?
The ruler of Central and Eastern.
Jesus Christ, they pay in cash. They don't trust cards. I think it all changed now with COVID. I was talking to Victor, Eva, and there's a big shift there as well.
Yeah, because people don't like to touch the cash because they think it has the disease on it. Yeah, I think that shifted, but
well, it's kind of long-term, what's going to change forever, right? I don't want to touch the cash. I don't want to touch the pad at the store.
Right.
If I've got a hardware, a local hardware store, I've had to go to get some things, right? I've been working around the house since, there's nothing better to do. They require me to touch that pad every time I check out, and I complain to them every time going, come on. We're all wearing masks and you've done all these other things, right, to make it safe for me in the store. And I've got to touch this machine that everybody else touched, fix this.
But also in the US, you're quite archaic with the need to sign credit card bills. That also needs to evolve.
It makes no sense. Nobody, that signature adds no security whatsoever to
exactly.
Guys, just going back to the supply chain discussion, I think it's very interesting, as I addressed at the beginning of the call, the role of Asia, China, and do you believe that we're going to, centralize a little bit more the production of clothes and how things are manufactured, or we're going back to normal and whatever?
I can tell you here in the U.S., I think things that are, considered essential, like medical supplies and those sorts of things, we'll bring those back to manufacture here, based on the experience we had of, what happens when the whole world needs the same thing all at once, right? And, guess what? You're going to take care of your own people first. Makes sense. And so, when we could not get the supplies we needed because most of that supply chain was located in, China and elsewhere, it opened a lot of eyes as to, maybe, just because it's the cheapest way to, manufacture it may not be the best way, from a strategic standpoint to do it.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I think actually the technology is also there for a different type of production, where it's not necessarily cheaper to offshore it always. It depends on the product, obviously, but I think, with 3D printing and other technologies that are out there for production, I think, and what Ludovico mentioned before for this agile, fast fashion production types, I think that model can be applied to other industries as well, not necessarily only to fashion. Just be much more closer to your customer and have better control. I think it started with the logistics because I think, do you have different warehouses throughout Brazil?
No, we are not big enough. No, we have only one.
Yeah, so there is, you know, at certain scale, it just makes sense that you have different warehouses here and there, and I think this is something that's going to happen at some point with the production as well, where you produce and ship from the same place. I think there might be a company almost close to that, the Shikel guys. Do you remember what was the name of?
Puya, his name is Puya,
Yeah.
the CEO
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
They're trying to do something similar to that. I think they're designed to shop, designed to produce item lead time is 4 hours, something like that. Yeah.
Ludovico, you have a take on that? About on the supply chain?
Well, the supply chain here, it's a little bit different, I think, than in Europe and the States, because Brazil has always had a very large part of national local manufacturing due to the high import taxes. So I think this is just bound to increase for a few reasons. One is macroeconomics. The Brazilian real has lost a lot of ground in the past months, so it's really expensive to produce in China now. And the other one is also the need of agility, right? You want to be able to react faster. There are certain products that are simply impossible to do here. I don't know, winter jackets, for example. And hence we will still rely on an international supply chain. But I think actually one of the projects we're doing now is to open up more local suppliers here in Brazil, exactly to be able to be more flexible on the supply chain. And yeah, one issue is that raw materials is still not local. So even though the supply chain may be local, the raw material comes from abroad. So we'll have to find a way to manage that and adapt it.
Perfect. I think we're about to wrap up really onto an hour. I'd like to open to some questions for our audience as well, and see if you guys would like to interact with our speakers. It's a unique chance, not every day that we have this opportunity. Let me see, we've got some questions here. So the first question is about, was about, supply chain and blockchain. Eva, can you just give me the name of the companies again, please?
Yeah, it's Provenance is a company providing this technology.
Provenance.
And then another company is not blockchain, but it's similar technology for transparency. It's EON.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I've spoken with Provenance in the past, and they were a strong player. Back when I was thinking about this stuff. There's one here in the U.S. called Bex 360. You might look into as well.
Cool.
That I found really interesting.
Cool. Can you type that, Scott, please?
Yeah, you want that in the chat?
Yes, please.
Yeah, give me a second here. Get this out of the way.
We have here, let me see.
Yeah, Bext, okay.
For China, this is a comment. China media said the factories and shops are there already, but the clients are not. So this is a warning if post-COVID really means normal, or rather new normal, with less money for shopping, more conscious purchasing, etc. 70% of payments are cashless even before COVID in China. Where can you source sustainable materials? It's a good question.
I mean, the short answer to that is just Google. But
but first of all, what is the definition?
What's the definition?
Good point.
No, but
that's the tricky thing.
That's a really big question.
Yeah. Well, I think so. While we were a little bit we had a little time on our hands in March and April. We actually launched a very cool technology, something that we call the impact score, and it's essentially an algorithm that calculates the water and CO2 savings for each item. And the way it calculates it is that it takes into account the composition of the item, the elements. So for example, if it has buttons, zippers, and things like that, the weight of the item and things like that. And so because sustainability, as Scott mentioned, is not very defined, so nobody really knows what it is. What we decided for ourselves that it is something that, so it's materials and products produced with less footprint, which means less water consumption and less energy or less CO2 footprint. And then it is important for us that the material is biodegradable or recyclable in some way. So there are, so for example, because cotton, for example, is a natural material, but it is very water consuming. There are great alternatives at the moment. So for example, hemp, it is using 4 times less water, and you can do some great fabrics out of hemp. And so we see people going back to that material now, or bamboo is another alternative, which also is much less water has less water consumption.
And then you could step a little further down the manufacturing process, right? And look at things like what Levi's doing in terms of using dyeing processes that use a lot less water, for example, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Or you laser. You can do a lot of things with lasers, machines on jeans instead of washing and traditional cutting.
Yeah, I think there is a company doing. There are several dyeing technologies that are, well, either use less water or no water at all. And there is one, I think, I can't remember the name of the company, who is doing dyeing with bacteria. So it's completely natural dyeing, and they have even been able to program the bacteria to do patterns, which is quite astonishing.
Sorry, someone on YouTube said hemp uses 95% less water. Just, you know.
Yeah, just FYI. Yeah.
There's a question to, actually, there are 2 questions to Lodovico. Lodovico, you got some vendors here, Lodovico.
I would like to ask if you think sustainability will be important for Brazilian consumer. That one. Yes, of course, will be. I mean, sustainability cannot not be important. It's important throughout, I think, here in Brazil, throughout the world. Here in Brazil, maybe the consciousness arrived a little bit later than in Europe or in the States, just because you know, it's not as high on the Maslow pyramid of needs, but now it's a thing, and consumers are becoming very, very sensible to that. The problem, though, is that Brazilian consumers, but probably consumers all over the world, are not ready to pay more for something that is sustainable. So it's our obligation as companies to try to adapt our supply chains to become better over time without charging the consumer. So this is challenging because you cannot do it overnight, right? Fabrics, we were talking about fabrics just now, and there are fabrics that have the same price and you can substitute. There are other fabrics that are simply much more expensive. Yeah. So there we'll have to have a plan, and what we're doing ourselves is we mapped all the fabrics we use, and we mapped what can be substituted at no cost or low cost impact, and what will take longer. And what will take longer, you will have to wait innovations also on the fabric side that you will then be able to adapt them without increasing the cost. Virtual showrooms, it seems a good idea,
virtual,
but how does it really
you saw
work?
That, yeah, thanks.
How can we check the quality of fabrics, the feel, the finishes of the garments? We are able, like the market is able to produce super high quality images, videos where you can see how it falls. You may have like a brand's representative in the showrooms that is able to describe how the products work. At the end, we'll just have to have a different mindset, right? Consumer also in Europe or I think in the UK it's 30% fashion e-commerce. At the beginning, everybody was wondering how they could buy online without seeing the fabrics, and now they're buying 30% of fashion online. So I think buyers will also have to change a little bit their approach and their mindset to be able to become more digital. Who knows what's the future of runway shows, right? Maybe runway shows will become digital as well. There's no need to move tons of people all over the world from Paris to New York to Milano to look at the catwalk. So all the actors in the industry will have to change a little bit their mindset, and brands can adopt technologies to show how products fit, how the fabrics is, how the sewing is done, etc.
I would jump in there because that's sort of something that the company I'm working for now, we're specifically working in, including, we just introduced a standalone video assistant, product, which was designed exactly for what you were talking about, where, from an online video, a customer can go into a shop, work with a sales associate, see product demonstrated. Yes, you don't get the touch and feel part of it, but, adding visual, I think, to the equation helps a lot, to a digital shopping experience. And, it's all part of, trying to adapt, right, your sales techniques and your communication techniques for customers, right, to fit the way they want to shop. You're going to have some percentage of customers that always want to come in and physically be in the store. And then you're going to have, I think now, a new set that, will avoid coming to the store as much as possible. I mean, I think I fall into that category, at the moment. I would rather just have it sent to my doorstep. And, if it doesn't work, then I'll return it. Right. If it's, which, it has its own problems, but that's the way I prefer to work it today. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. This audience is not shy, which is great. Last time they were a bit shy. So there's a question here to Cool and Conscious. At the website product description is sustainability, ethical product, handcrafted in the USA with high quality materials. What do you mean by ethical?
Sorry.
Yeah.
By ethical, we mean, ethically means that we know the people who have produced them and they have been paid normal wage, and the items have been produced in an environment that's not life-threatening, because that's another issue in the fashion industry.
On that question, Eva, how do you keep track of that? Do you have requirements on your?
Yeah,
it's interesting.
We do have requirements, and we do it in couple of layers, right? So we first do an initial research on items, and then once we see that the brand fits our preliminary checks, then we connect with them, and then we ask for certain proof of production. We ask for samples to test the materials and things like that. And once we have onboarded them, we use SGS to do ad hoc on some of the brands. So they do random checks once per year. So where they do like a secret shopper, or they go and investigate in the production facility. So they do different things to just check randomly brands that we onboard. So that's that.
Perfect. One thing that was not to mention, but perhaps would be nice to hear your opinions about it, is the use of virtual reality for purchasing fashion clothes.
I'll jump in on that.
Would now be a good time to start using such technologies?
It's been a good time for a while, right? This just accelerates it being a good time. And if you think about, like, I'm associated with another company, Memomi, which does digital mirrors and all sorts of interesting things with AR on digital screens. They have, for instance, a virtual hair coloring product they've done with Shiseido. Think about it. Do you really, want to go? There are some that do, but if you wanted to avoid spending extra time at the beauty shop, right? Testing are talking about hair color, you could do all this ahead of time, right? And make an informed decision right from the comfort of your own home as to what you wanted to do with that. Or they do virtual makeup. How many folks are going to want to go to their local beauty store and try testers in this current environment, right? Been touched by, I think that the days of the tester are done for now, right? So virtual makeup, is a perfect solution to that, where I can at least go try on looks as long as it's actually photorealistic, and make some informed decisions about what's the right beauty product, especially when you consider those things are not returnable, right? So you really want to make a good choice. I think that even now virtual try on of fashion may get a kick in the pants. The difficult thing about that has been to produce the realistic 3D models of the garments, right? That it was cost prohibitive, right, to do that at scale. In this new normal, maybe that it's not cost prohibitive now. Maybe that maybe the economics have changed some, and this is a more viable way to offer try-ons for customers.
Yeah,
certainly
just
an
to
opportunity there. Yeah.
just to add on here, I think again, going back to this very inefficient way the fashion industry has been built, there is very little information on the products at the different sizes. So for my other company who is doing data management for e-commerce, for example, they are fixing data streams and adding attributes for items. And in fashion, you almost never have the full information. So going to virtual reality and creating a perfect fit scenario where you can see how an item looks on you requires for the algorithm to actually have enough information on the model, all of its sizes and its composition, so it can actually render a reality close kind of a picture. And so this is also another issue that we need to start addressing, because this data is just not there.
I'm curious to ask you all, sorry, we're about to wrap up, but curious to ask you all about the pace of digital transformation, as we've all been talking about. You're all talking about innovation now. Ludovico, I want to hear from you. What are you doing in terms of? I mean, you're a digital native brand. How are you innovating at this time? Because I think you are, but it's also interesting to see what our other companies are doing. Right? They stood still for a long time. Boards, they were very romantic on if they should implement technology, and now, well, shit hit the fan. Sorry, pardon my French, but they're doing something. So what you guys are doing? Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say that I think this question should go also to Scott.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think we talked about supply chain technology like 3D prototyping, pattern making. So on the consumer side, I think we do what everybody else is doing. We try. I mean, we've been very digitally minded since the beginning. So everything is designed around shopping on a smartphone, right? We design things to fit on a smartphone, to work very well here. We designed the customer experience to be extremely digital. What's interesting is what I've seen other brands doing. So what happened in the past 3 months is that the companies accelerated like they've never done before all the digital projects that they had. So we've seen companies like very traditional retailers coming up with WhatsApp sales, like WhatsApp-based sales. Drive-through, they changed their stores to become drive-through locations. So they're like dark stores, dark kitchens, and the consumer buys online and then drives in front of the stores and picks up. What else I've seen? So ship from store, things that you maybe abroad are very classical, but ship from store. So all the store network became a distribution center. So by doing that, you reduce a lot the shipping cost and increase the inventory availability, because practically all your assortment is now available regardless of where it is stored. Well, a lot of things these are harder to grasp for a consumer, but a lot of things maybe around data and prediction of using prediction algorithm along the merchandise planning process, so that you can design and develop and produce the right amount of products based on a prediction algorithm that brands. We are doing that, and I know some others are working that. Very interestingly, there were still retailers that had no clue who their customer was. Like that, the online customer was a separate registration than the offline customers. So they had no overarching vision of the customer. And traditional brands are now putting a lot of effort in creating this like really one perspective of the customer, so that they can know much more who their customer is, communicate with them one-to-one in a personalized manner, and and take much better action to serve that customer. So this is what a few things we've seen in the traditional space. We've been doing that, so it's natural, but we've seen traditional retailers moving in these directions.
When you think about what's driving digital transformation, right? There's a little graphic I've been sharing with some friends and colleagues, that ask, who led digital transformation at your customer, and they, had three answers: A, the CEO; B, the CEO.
COVID.
C, COVID, right? Which I thought was very appropriate, because all of a sudden, digital transformation, for that a lot of brands and retailers were playing lip service to, now actually became something that was a matter of surviving, right? To do that, and buy online and pick up from store, now was a matter of survival, as an example. I would say that some of that, was driven by the necessity of COVID-19, and was certainly driven by the customers now actually wanting that service. The fact is that, just because you offered buy online, pick up on store, was not necessarily meant that the majority of your customers wanted to actually do that pre-pandemic, right? The current situation is what's driven those to be, actually sustainable efforts and opportunities for brands. I think that there was a period of several weeks where everybody sort of sat on their hands and tried to figure out what's going on, and now it's starting to feel like there's some momentum, amongst the retailers that I've been talking to about, actually, starting new projects and actually, doing some of the experimentation required, right, to deliver the next big thing for your customers. I saw a comment in the chat section where someone said, it requires a lot of constant experiment. I agreed with requires a lot of constant experimentation. The way I always called it was you had to kiss a lot of frogs, right? To get to the prince, right? To get to the thing that was really going to resonate with your customers. It's really not digital transformation now. It's a symbiosis that's required to run a business today. And it's not, physical commerce versus digital commerce. It's just commerce. We've been saying that for a while, and the pandemic has just driven that home, right? Any different way you can touch a customer and resonate with that customer is important, and digital is a huge part of it now. It was growing fast, and it's going to grow even faster now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think there's nothing much to say. I've always been very astonished when companies that I've worked with say, okay, I have one team that is doing the e-commerce and a different team that's doing the other type of commerce, and they're on two different P&Ls, and they are like two different channels, and they are competing with one another. And I don't know where this thinking comes from, but ultimately, I think this changes now much more than ever, and people start to see that they can actually benefit from just having a more integrated approach towards how they communicate with customers and where they sell.
Yeah, I think on that point, there's something very interesting about your position, Lodovico, because you're the COO and CFO, right? So it somehow shows like a different organizational structure. Like,
Well, in a startup, people
right.
have many
Is
many
that it? Is
C's,
that why?
many C's, but they don't really reflect anything. It just evolves like that.
Well, but it's a 400 people startup, and isn't it?
Yeah, we're startups in our hearts and minds. No, but we have many people also because we have a factory and a distribution center. Otherwise, the team would be much smaller. But yes, so I think you can often have what Eva was saying, right, about digital business. We've seen cases where companies have, like, there is like revenue targets for the head of e-commerce and then for the stores, and then they fight with each other to maintain the customers, and then they don't want to share the customers because the two divisions are fighting. It doesn't work. It will never work like that. You have to find ways where the two businesses, the two channels work together to create even more sales than fight amongst each other to keep the customers.
I lived that personally at Neiman's. You know, when I joined them, you know, in the early 2000s, those two businesses, and Neiman Marcus was a very early adopter of e-commerce. You know, they launched their website in like 1998, so they were very early. But those businesses were completely separate when I joined that company, with a completely separate P&L, a completely different set of buyers and staff that dealt with those businesses, and they didn't talk to each other. You know, it more or less just shared the same name, right? You know, to be quite honest. And it was set in stone that it would always be that way. It would never change. That's what I was told when I joined. And that was all lies, because they saw the writing on the wall. When omni-channel began a thing everybody was talking about, and they eventually saw what the logic of that was, and folded all those teams together and combined those teams. Where they were using shared resources and shared buyers and all those things, and it all worked a lot better when they went to that model. It was the right thing to do, and it continues to be the right thing to do in terms of my friend Steve Dennis likes to call it harmonized retail, right? It's not a channel. It's all just different touch points for your customer.
Yeah.
Fantastic. We're gonna wrap up. There's a final question. Any advice for small brands starting out?
Well,
Eva, I think you started a few businesses.
yes, I'm gonna go with this one. So it depends what kind of business you're in, but in terms of technology, I'm a huge fan of off-the-shelf technology. I like to use things that are, I think when you're starting off as a small brand, it makes, for example, if you want to go into e-commerce, it makes absolutely no sense to develop a platform on your own. There is a zillion platforms that are out there available for you at one click, and instead of wasting time to build your own proprietary technology that you don't even know what kind of technology you need at that point of time, you can just go use something, get out there, meet your customer, understand if you have actually a business case or not. And then if you have a business case, when you know your business case and you start growing, then you can have a much better idea what kind of technology you need. So my only advice is just be very quick and don't overthink things, and get out there, and start doing things, and the market will react. And if you have the right formula, if you have the right product, you will find your way through. I think that's the advice I have.
It's a great point. There's the number of kind of off-the-shelf tools that are there are amazing, right? Today, my PowerFront, as an example, not a startup really anymore. They've been around for a while, but it's definitely not a startup. But 100% virtual, right? I've got 100 employees around the world, and Zoom is our office, right?
Yeah.
And the systems that we use to support that business are primarily except for our own core technology that we offer to our customers are off the shelf sort of systems that are very easily replaceable when something better comes along. Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. All right. So I think that was it. You have all been fantastic. I really appreciate what you've done here today, sharing your wisdom, letting everybody evolve a little bit. That's the name of the new project. So thank you all, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good
thank
luck
you
to
all who
everyone.
attended. Yeah. All the best. Stay safe, and we'll be in touch.
All right.
Bye.
Cheers,
Cheers.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.